Who were the biggest day one winners at the NFL Combine? We'll break it down on this episode on the Locked On Cowboys podcast.
You are Locked On Cowboys, your daily Dallas Cowboys podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Welcome back to the Locked On Cowboys podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. We'd like to thank you for making us your first listen of the day. Today's episode is brought to you by FanDuel. Right now, new FanDuel customers can get $150 in bonus bets if your first $5 bet wins. Welcome back. I am your host, Marcus Mosher. You can follow me on Twitter at Marcus_Mosher. Joining me today, as always, is Landon McCool. You can follow him on Twitter at McCoolBCB. Landon, day one, NFL Combine in the books. We've had some players work out in Indianapolis, not all, some. Let's talk about some of the biggest winners coming out of the testing. Who impressed you?
Well, first of all, I've decided that I'm going to wait until my pro day to do my
that makes sense. You want to make sure you're comfortable.
I just want to make sure I'm healthy and everything. Yeah. Look, despite the fact, look, here's always the thing, right? Is that, this may be an ever expanding group of guys that are not working out in the combine. It seems year to year, it feels like everyone is feeling a certain level of entitlement to not need to test. And to the truth of the matter is that these teams aren't punishing these guys by drafting them lower or anything for not testing. So they're going to continue to do it. But the good news there is that it does provide opportunity for guys that are a little bit lower to kind of really show their stuff, and not super low. I mean, I'm talking about guys like, Jihaad Campbell, who is still like the number one linebacker overall and got room to kind of give some buzz for his workout. Or, I think some of the other defensive tackle guys, because really it feels like the defensive line guys were the ones who you felt like weren't working out as much. But I thought, a couple guys just off the top of my head, and we'll talk about the big winners here in a bit. But I thought that Derek Harmon, Tyleik Williams had really good workouts, not just in the testing, but when you watch the actual drills, the way they were moving and everything. I thought Harmon specifically looked really good on those hoop drills. Tyleik Williams for being 300. Again, I think the key thing here is understanding the frame of reference, right? Tyleik Williams came in at 334 pounds or whatever
He was. Awesome.
And looked awesome. Was just moving around and really looked like a great athlete. Some of the, obviously the defensive ends are the guys that are kind of the freak athletes that we were expecting to see. And we'll obviously, like I said, talk about some of those guys. But I thought that Brady Swinson, who is a guy who didn't test elite, but looked really, really good, kind of, again, running around in the drills and just moving around a bunch. And then a couple of linebackers I'll mention that just I felt like kind of stood out. I mentioned, obviously, Jihaad Campbell. Carson Schlesinger is a guy whose name that you're going to start hearing more and more of.
UCLA
already. He's a guy that was an impressive athlete. I thought Barrett Carter had a really good day. Your guy, OU player Danny Stuntsman, I thought really, really impressed and opened some eyes as well. Lots of really athletic linebackers, a bunch of different body types, but definitely a kind of a deeper athletic class than I expected kind of going into this competition.
Do you want me to do my 15 seconds on Danny Stutzman before we move on?
Yes, please.
So first of all, this is a guy the Cowboys had a formal interview with at the Combine. Wouldn't be surprised if he is somebody that's a 30 visit, but he's 6'3", 233, ran a 4.52. He's got long arms. He was a two-time All-American selection at linebacker. Just an awesome athlete. Right now, on the consensus board, he's like 130. And I think he should be like a top 75 pick. Like, he reminds me a lot of like what Leighton Vander Esch looked like the first couple of years, where you're just this big, long, athletic linebacker that comes downhill. That one was really exciting. I need you to be my conscience here a little bit with one of these players.
Let's do.
I love Jihaad Campbell's tape. Love him. He came in at 6'3". This is the Alabama linebacker, 6'3", 235 pounds. He had a 10.7 broad jump, which is crazy. A 4.52 40-yard dash with a 1.53 10-yard. All that to say, his RAS right now is in the 99.5 percentile among off-ball linebackers. And I'm not saying that the Cowboys should draft him at 12, but I'm not
not
necessarily.
saying.
Well, it's just that the more I think about the way the NFL is going, and you know me, I don't really value linebackers. I own the domain linebackersdon'tmatter.com. You can go check that out. This is an awesome player, and I do wonder like what it would look like on the same defense with Micah Parsons and DeMarvion Overshown and the corners they have.
Yeah, I mean, look, I think as a guy that, I mean, it's a lot like Jalon Walker a little bit, right? Where it's like
Jalen Walker. We'll get you to say it right by the end of the thing.
I can't believe I can't that. Jalen Walker, yes. God, that should be an E. I'm sorry, that should be an E instead of an O.
Yeah, I agree.
It is a lot like Jalen Walker, where you know that it's you're getting a linebacker, but then you're also getting a guy that you think could give you, plus pass rush as a as a part time or in Jalen's situation. Jalen may be a guy that they end up trying to move full time to as a pass rusher.
I think he's better as an edge, anyways. But yes,
wherever he goes. I think Campbell to me is he needs to get more instinctual. He's still very young at the position, right? Like I think that's the thing is that this is a guy that everyone has always known as a good athlete and as a good defensive player. I think that it's only been recently that they've kind of figured out that this guy's a good linebacker, and I do think he has. Some guys you move to linebacker and it's hard, right? You see the patterns moving in front of your face and it's too much information and it's just difficult. And I do think that that's not the case with Campbell. Like he seems to get it. It's just he needs more experience at the position. But literally outside of that, I mean, he's almost the kind of perfect athlete you want at the position. He's not undersized. He's got really solid size, so he can play in the middle and mix it up. He's very, very, very physical. He comes downhill in a blur. And I think you saw a lot of all of that in the testing yesterday and in the drills. And they even had him, I don't know if you saw this, but they even had him stay after the broadcast and do some pass rush workouts on some bags, the same drills that the defensive linemen were doing. And he looked really great, dipping his shoulder around the bag and coming back the other way. So, yeah, I definitely think he's a guy that and listen, I'm sure you brought this up too, because not only is he one of your favorite guys, but I think it was last night or 2 nights ago, I called you and I said, hey, guess who I saw and I fell in love with? It's Jihaad Campbell. So, yeah, I definitely agree. I don't know that I'm necessarily advocating for him at 12, but if his name pops up on these mocks that I'm running from here on, I'm certainly not going to shy away from taking him if he's the best guy there.
So I don't want to do the whole thing on Campbell, but he's like one of these names that like I'm comfortable at 12, but if you trade back to like 17, 18, now it's like, okay, hey, I just don't care necessarily about positional value at that point. If you got a 3rd round pick or a 2nd round pick, you're just taking the best player available. I've got a true 1st round grade on him. He's just an awesome player. And if the Cowboys end up picking him, I'm going to be super excited because I think that's a guy that is I think he's the perfect NFL linebacker for today's game, where you need somebody that can defend read option, that's going to be able to move and spy quarterbacks, that can be the simulated pressure when you're showing 6 and only rushing 4. He just feels like he is what everybody is searching for.
Yeah, especially with the sim pressure stuff. Absolutely there. Before we get on to the next segment, do you think we could talk about a couple guys that were maybe a little disappointing, or at least situation was a little disappointing? I got to tell you, Walter Nolan and Mason Graham both not working out. Like, and on top of that, both of them coming in undersized. I mean, not so much Nolan, because I think Nolan actually looked what we thought, and we actually got a preview of that at the Senior Bowl a little bit. But Mason Graham coming in with the arm length that he had, and basically 20 pounds under his listed weight at Michigan, and then on top of that, not working out. Like, look, I think Mason Graham is still going to probably be a top 10 pick, but I think there's guys like that who, were probably, in a spot to secure themselves as top 5 or top 10 picks who didn't work out. There's a couple of them, not just Mason Graham. I don't want to just zero him out, but Walter Nolan also didn't work out. I just think that was a mistake, right? Especially for a guy like Mason Graham, who, again, his tape is elite. His tape is what it is, right? But to come in with short arms and undersized, I felt like you can kind of temper a lot of that by going out there and having an incredible workout, which he most likely would have done, but he just decided not to do that.
And I'm going to mention Mike Green, the edge rusher
Yeah.
for Marshall.
Yeah.
I know the report was he had a hamstring strain. We'll see.
Come on, man.
I know, but it's like we already had some off-field stuff, and I
Yep.
feel comfortable talking about it because he mentioned it at the podium. Like, there were 2 different sexual assault cases, one from high school, one from college. Both were dismissed, or I'm not exactly sure, but there's no pending legal trouble. This is somebody who got kicked off the Virginia team.
That's right.
He's undersized. We knew he was undersized from the Senior Bowl measurements. It's not that going out on the combine would like get rid of all the off the field concerns, but it's like it would change the narrative a little bit. Instead of us talking about the off the field stuff, let's talk about your 40 and your 3-cone and your vertical. I thought this was a missed opportunity for Mike Green, and I think he got bad advice from somebody for skipping the combine, because I'm just telling you, scouts are not going to love having to make the trip to Marshall to watch one NFL prospect work out.
Yeah, and again, like, I think Mike Green to me might be the most extreme version of that phenomenon that we're talking about, because Mason obviously is who he is. Like I said, a top 10 pick for sure. But there are a handful of guys who I felt like they could get away with not working out that really made a mistake, and I think that they likely could have been top of the first round, or solidified their spot in the first round. And then just, kind of made a poor choice to not work out.
All right, let's talk about the biggest winner from the NFL Combine, Jamar Stewart. We're saving it so we can do a whole segment on him. Let's talk about his performance on Thursday night next. This episode is brought to you by FanDuel. I absolutely love FanDuel. And when the game tips off, the NBA action is just getting started. And there's no better place to get in on the action than FanDuel, America's #1 sportsbook. Because with FanDuel, you can place live bets throughout the game. So even if you miss the opening tip-off or just want to bet on a fourth quarter comeback, you can stay in on the action. It's what I did last night. I was working on some NFL Combine stuff. By the time I got done, the Timberwolf Laker game was in the second half. Went and put on a couple bets for my guy, Luka Doncic, lifelong fan, Luka Doncic. And if you're looking for a bigger payout, you can even combine your bets into a same game parlay. The app is so easy to use, and when you win, you get paid instantly. It's one of the best things about FanDuel. And right now, new FanDuel customers can get $150 in bonus bets if your first $5 bet wins. Just visit FanDuel.com to join today. That is FanDuel.com for your shot at $150 in bonus bets, and make every moment more with FanDuel, the official sports betting partner of the NBA. Welcome back to the Locked On Cowboys podcast. We'd like to thank you for making us your first listen every single day. Layden, let's have a conversation about Jamar Stewart, because we knew that he would test well. So it's not a surprise that he went out and tested extremely well. It is a little surprising that he tested as well as he did. Right now, if you look at Raz, the relative athletic score, he has a score of 10.0. He is the highest, or he has got the highest athletic score ever for any defensive end prospect. 6'5", 267, 40-inch vertical, 10-11 broad jump, 4.59 40-yard dash. In his 10-yard split of 1.58 is the fastest of all time for any player above 260 pounds on defense. Absolutely insane.
Yeah, and look, I mean, I think the number to me that really is the most insane, and I think they made a bunch of different graphics about it, was the 40-inch vertical, right? And this is also a good opportunity to talk about another guy that we didn't mention before, who has the best name in all of this draft. Landon Jackson, who had a 40 and a half.
I was like, Landon Jackson, that's kind of a plain name, but go ahead.
Oh, it's not a plain name. First name in the history. They had a 40 and a half inch vertical as well. And I think that's like, it's a good comparison to have, right? Because to me, again, John Owning would disagree with me a little bit on this, but I didn't see a guy who had a 40 and a half inch vertical in Landon Jackson.
No.
You see that with Shemar Stewart, right? So I think the big key thing, and you said the key phrase here, and I think it's constantly the thing we have to fight against these days, like the day after the combine, the week after the combine, we're looking at these numbers with saucer eyes, right? We have to remember, do not count the athleticism twice, right? We knew Jamar Stewart just by watching the tape, was an elite athlete, like an incredible athlete, and doing things on the football field. They're like, goodness gracious. I think that, him coming out here and confirming it shouldn't bump his grade. I think it will for some folks, but it shouldn't necessarily bump his grade up. And I'll even go as far as to say it was incredibly impressive, but maybe not even as impressive as I thought it was going to be, right? Like I thought he was, going to run a 4.5. I thought he was going to be,
well, he did 4.59 or whatever it was.
Yeah. He was telling folks that he was going to run a 4.4, and he also showed up at 267 pounds, which I think is a good thing. I'm not discounting that, but the legend of the guy was that he was going to be 280 pounds and run potentially a sub 4.5, Marcus, sub 4.5. So, yeah, I think he did. Obviously, he had an all-world combine, one of the great combine workouts. I'm not trying to discount what he did. I'm just saying that it was an incredible workout. We knew he was going to give us an incredible workout. That's why he is rated where he is already. Let's not raise him up because some other people just found out that this guy was athletic.
100% agree. We shouldn't count it twice. However, there is part of me, and we were talking about this before the show. Yeah. When you're looking at the RAS score, again, relative athletic score, 10 is the highest number you can get. I think the difference between like a 90 RAS and a 99 RAS is actually smaller than the gap between a 99 and a 100 RAS, because it's so rare to have a 100 RAS. And I think the only guys that have done it are like Calvin Johnson, Aaron Donald, JJ Watt, Evan Mathis, Jason Kelsey, and I think that's it. I mean, it's a really, really small group of guys that are that athletic. The hard part is like, where do you draft a guy whose production is this low, but the athleticism is this high? Usually, and my stance on this, and if you're a longtime listener, I want to, in the first round, I want to be safe. I want to take the guys that have the athleticism and the production. But when you get to this level of athleticism, I'm wondering if the production just doesn't matter that much.
Oh, well, and I will say that the window has even shifted. Like the conversation used to be, oh, well, you can't be a first rounder if you don't have production and traits. And that's not even the case anymore. Like you just need traits. You'll get the right kind of traits will get you drafted in the first round. And then it became, well, you can't go in the top 15 or top 10 if you don't have production or traits. And I think that's the conversation we're having right now, right? Is that Jamar Stewart has reached a level of athleticism in which, hasn't really destroyed the need for production. And I think it's an interesting conversation because, and I don't think I'm speaking out of both sides of my mouth here, right? Because I think that there's a difference between not double counting the athleticism and then having the athleticism confirmed to be, I mean, not just elite, but like the best in history at your position, right? Like I do think that you're right that difference between being, in the 99th percentile and the 100th percentile of athleticism is, 1% of difference, which is a lot in the NFL, right?
By the way, there's one other guy, Byron Jones was the other guy that had 10.
Well, of course, right? So, and look, not every single one of those guys, is the best player at their position ever or anything like that. But the hit rate is obviously incredibly high, right? So, and it does kind of fly in the face of exactly the kind of production that you usually need to have to draft someone in that high and still feel comfortable about getting a floor that is going to be something that he's not going to bust out, right? So, look, I think obviously the difference is, you and I were discussing, could this be the ultimate test for do you need production if you have enough athleticism, except for the fact that Jamar Stewart has production on tape, right? It's just on paper that he doesn't necessarily, and even on paper, if you look at the right numbers, he does produce on paper. It's just specifically sacks that he doesn't have, right? So I think that that's the thing that kind of, flies in the face of this a little bit, is that when you watch Jamar Stewart, you see all that athleticism. There's a reason that we expected this athleticism in the combine, is because he does produce in a certain way. He does disrupt it's an issue with finishing, which I think is more of a technique problem more than anything.
And this also isn't one of these things where it's never happened before. It literally happened 2 years ago, where Trayvon Walker had very minimal production at Georgia, but because he was awesome at the combine, he ended up jumping guys like Kayvon Thibodeau and Aiden Hutchinson. Now, I still have a problem with him going one, but he's been a good player in the NFL. He's progressed every year. He has had back-to-back double-digit sack seasons. He's a really good run defender. I think Stewart and Walker are at least similar athletes and similar talents. Later today, I'll make a graphic on those guys and we'll show how similar of athletes they are. My question for you before we move on, I'm not asking you whether the Cowboys will draft him at 12, but do you think he even gets there at this point?
I think there's certainly a question. Look, I think people have learned the wrong lesson with the Trayvon Walker thing. The problem is that Aiden Hutchinson was there. Right. Like
that's the thing.
That's the thing, right? Is that, they made a bad evaluation. And again, the other part is what you said. I don't know that I would take Jamar Stewart at number 1 the way that they did with Trayvon Walker.
And I wouldn't take Stewart over Abdul Carter either. We're not I don't think that's going to be the case here. But if you're drafting Stewart at 12, I think where it's worth the squeeze.
What's being proposed for Shemar Stewart is much more reasonable than what was being proposed for Trayvon Walker being
100%.
I think, as we all agree. Now, to answer your question, I don't think he's going to be there at 12. I mean, I think that, there's going to be Carolina at 8, maybe. I mean, I think there's a couple of different spots where
Fran at 11.
Yeah. I mean, he certainly has shown with the athleticism. And again, I don't think that people are going to discount his production. The teams are going to discount his production because the teams are going to watch the tape. They're going to see what he's doing. So I think there's a good chance he doesn't make it to 12.
All right, let's talk about Brian Schottenhiemer, who spoke with the media on Thursday. Some interesting quotes. We'll get to that next. Welcome back to the Locked On Cowboys podcast. We'd like to thank you for making us your first listen of the day. For your second listen, check out the new Locked On NFL Draft Show with Damian Parson and Keith Sanchez. Now that the season is over, get the latest draft rankings, rumors, and news every single day. Find Locked On NFL Draft on YouTube or wherever you listen to your podcast. Also, shout out to Jerry Trotter, a longtime listener of the podcast. He wanted me to give him a shout out, so I did. There you go. Let's talk about Brian Schottenhiemer. And actually, I want to talk about a quote from Will McClay instead of Brian Schottenheimer, because I thought Will McClay had one of the more interesting quotes yesterday. He was talking, they asked him about how this process has been, the draft, the offseason, with Schotty. First of all, Will McClay's just face lit up when they asked him about Brian Schottenheimer. Like, you can just tell. I don't want to say this was a Will McClay hire, but I think Will McClay was certainly on board with this. But one of the things that he said was that usually when head coaches get hired, they hire their buddies and their friends to come join the staff. Whereas Schottenheimer went out and searched for different voices with different ideas. And Schottenheimer talked about how in the summer he watches and talks to other coaches outside of the Cowboys to just try to see where these guys are at. I think that was a fascinating quote from Will McClay that shows that this isn't going to be the same type of atmosphere we've seen over the last couple of years.
Yeah, I think you nailed it. Like it's the quote with the Will McClay that he gave us, combined with what Shotty told us about what he was doing in the summers between seasons, and basically, cold calling coaches and trying to get names of guys that those coaches liked. Hey, who's a coach I've never heard of? Who's a coach who's really doing a great job that you think should be out there? Just trying to gather information over the years. I think one of the angles with the Schottenheimer hire that I have really started to get excited about is the idea that this is a guy who had opportunities to get head coaching, looks at 32, like he said, right? And he's 54, if I'm not mistaken now, or 56, maybe 54, I think. And so he basically had it shot early, right? As the hot new kind of, the Sean McVay of 2005 or whatever it was, right? And then obviously didn't get a job at that point, but has spent the last 20 years trying to think about it and try to figure out how he would actually do things when the time came. And I think that what that means is that you're getting an interesting blend of a head coach who's never been a head coach before. So he is bringing some new ideas and isn't afraid to bring in new ideas. Right. And I think we talked about that. That was, the kind of indicated by the idea of going out to find the best guy for the position and pulling them from college when he needs to, right? Not just going to hire his best friends. And then a guy that has actually, combined with a guy that has actually been in the league for a very long time, obviously has a lot of face time and been around a lot of head coaches, including his father and Pete Carroll and Mike McCarthy. And, so I think that we're getting an interesting blend of a first-time head coach, but a first-time head coach who's been around for a long time and has been thinking about being a head coach for a long time and isn't cutting corners. I think that's what's really fun and fascinating is that, like they said, it's not a bunch of nepo. He's obviously he's going to be viewed as a nepo baby. I mean, his last name is Schottenheimer, but he's not necessarily doing that himself when he's hiring his staff. He's going out and getting the guys that he thinks are the best guys for the job, and not necessarily his best buds.
Yeah, I mean, I like the fact that they've hired a bunch of coaches who I'm sure Jerry Jones has never heard of before.
Never heard of, yeah.
Right? And that's I'm kind of joking, but that's actually a good thing. Like
Oh,
they're going out and getting candidates that they want to have on the roster, rather than what we've seen in previous years where coaches are being forced upon guys. I mean, go back to when the Cowboys hired Wade Phillips. They hired Jason Garrett before they hired Wade Phillips, right? That's a bad situation. Kellen Moore was on staff before Mike McCarthy got hired, and it was McCarthy had to have Kellen Moore installed as an offensive coordinator. That's just it's not. I'm not saying that can't work, but that's generally a bad idea. You want your coaching staff to be built by your head coach, and I like the way that Schottenheimer has done that. The other thing that I thought was interesting coming out of the press conference was that we found out that he got in trouble from Pete Carroll for letting Russ cook a little bit. I think there's a general belief that Schottenheimer is a conservative play caller, but it sounds like it was more him, or at least he took the blame for wanting to be a little bit more pass happy in Seattle.
That's breaking news, right? Like I don't think I ever heard that angle. I think most of all of us have always assumed that Pete and Brian were kind of aligned on that sort of thing. And so I guess kudos to them for kind of not letting that slip out until now. Right. But that was a little fascinating, right? Especially in light of just how much Shoddy has been talking about the need to be more physical and the need to run the football a little bit more. I think it is interesting to hear him come out and say, no, I was the guy that was trying to get Russ to cook and to know the meme, right? To know the actual meme, right? So I mean, I almost wanted to kind of like, share that with Mina Kimes and some of these longtime Seattle Seahawks fans, just to get their opinion on hearing that, right? Just because like that it does kind of fly in the face of what everyone had learned about that whole situation. So yeah, that was interesting to hear. And if I guess, if anything, it makes you maybe feel even a little bit better about a Brian Schottenheimer offense that, that he was being held back by Pete Carroll when he wanted to kind of throw the ball around a little bit more.
I wish I had the quote in front of me, but he was talking about the run game and how he's like, we want to run the ball. We want to be physical, but if you have the weapons, and then he kind of smirked a little bit like, we'll be okay throwing the ball. To me, what that said is like, we've got CeeDee Lamb. This is not going to be an offense where we just try to take the air out of the football. He also, in the last thing, he talked about free agency and trades and that kind of stuff. But one of the first things he said is that right now they're putting together plans for player development. He specifically mentioned Tyler Guyton. He said that they put together for Jake Ferguson going from year 1 to year 2 really helped him put up big numbers. I thought that was interesting. That to me, it sounds like they're really excited about Tyler Guyton, and he's going to be your left tackle this year.
Yeah, and I think that kind of just really drives home a fact that you feel like you were learning when they hired the guys that they hired, right? Like you're hiring college coaches, they're teachers, right? They're talent developers, right? Like that's what those guys do. So yeah. I think that's, and that again, like that's part of the reason that you feel good about what this team is doing, right? Because when they made these hires, like you could go and see, this is the same wide receiver coach who developed Puka Nacua in college, and all these other guys at Oregon and all these different spots he's had, and Kansas State. You're like, oh, Connor Riley was at Kansas State, and those guys. Offensive line's always punching up its weight, so it's very easy to go to these guys' history and see players and groups that they've developed and then see, and understand why that they're the hire. And it doesn't always feel like you get that when you get these hires at times in previous regimes. It feels like times you're trying to figure out, reverse engineer, well, what did they see in this guy who coached the second worst defensive back group in last season? These guys, like, you look at their resume and you understand why they're being brought on at the position group that they're being brought on.
Last little note before we go. The Cowboys' new receiver coach, Junior Adams, coached Emeka Egbuka in high school.
Did he really?
He did. So just remember that when we get a little bit closer to the draft. So, all right, that is it for today's show. We want to thank you for making Locked On Cowboys your first listen every single day. Go check out the channel on YouTube, download the podcast wherever you get your podcasts. We are free and available on all platforms. We'll be back on Monday to break down all of the action from Indianapolis. So make sure you tune in for that. Follow Landon at McCoolBCB. I'm at Marcus_Mosier. We'll see you Monday.